Hi, I would like to borrow some money. Yeah, maybe around $90 billion. Debt can be a very scary word for many people. It is usually associated with financial problems because you usually borrow money when you don't have enough of it. But recently, Singapore has announced in its 2021 budget that it is going to borrow money to fund some of its projects. It is the first time in 40 years that they are going to do it. The amount that we are looking at, 90 billion Sing dollars worth of debt. That's 9 and 10 zeros. Spread that over a year and you need to spend $2,800 per second to hit $90 billion. Why is the Singapore government doing this? And more importantly, why is it a good move? Let me explain. Before that, we need to talk about how the Singapore government spends money. They are forced to have a net positive every term, which means whatever they collect via taxes and other means must be more than whatever they spend. Whatever is left over will go into the reserves. That is why we don't have politicians over-promising handouts to the people in order to get votes. When politicians in Singapore campaign to be voted into the parliament, they have to explain their policies and how they are going to fund them. So over the years, Singapore has accumulated a huge reserve of savings. This reserve is Singapore's rainy day fund. We took out a portion of it in 2020 to fund our COVID-19 policies. Several payouts were given out to Singaporeans and Singaporean companies to help them tide through the tough period. It was huge news because it was the first time in decades that we are taking out money from the reserves. And I'm proud as a Singaporean to say that as a nation, we have dealt relatively well with COVID-19 financially because we have been saving up for a rainy day just like this. The money inside the reserves is also invested to make sure that it grows well. The average returns per year is around 5.5%. And this is an important number to remember for the rest of the video. You see, due to the global pandemic that is COVID-19, interest rates around the world have dropped, which means you don't have to pay as much interest to borrow money. This is to promote borrowing, spending, and investing in order to drive the economy back up. The Singaporean government knows this and realizes it makes more sense to borrow money than dig into the reserves. So instead of using our reserves, which is growing at around 5.5%, why don't we borrow money which will only cost 1 to 2% interest to fund our projects? By doing this, we protect our reserves by not withdrawing from it, get enough money for our current and future projects at a very low interest rate, and we create more jobs by having more projects to work on. Borrowing money to invest is not something new. Most of us do it by getting a mortgage loan for our house. Some of us borrow to invest in the stock market or leverage instruments. The idea is simple. Borrow at a low rate, invest so that your returns can beat the interest rate. If and only if it's done right, then your returns will be magnified compared to when you don't borrow. Let me illustrate using an example. Imagine there is an investment tool giving 5% returns every year. Person A invests $10,000 inside and earns $500 every year. Person B also invests $10,000 inside but borrows an additional $90,000 to invest in the same tool. He earns $5,000 every year. But of course, he needs to pay interest. Let's say interest is 2%. He has to pay $1,800 of interest every year, but his net investment returns is $3,200. Compare that to person A who puts in the same amount but earns a lot less, and you will find that borrowing to invest can be a very smart move if you do it properly. With many countries struggling to cope with COVID-19, printing money and spending recklessly, Singapore has dealt with the financial aspect of COVID-19 really well. While the fight isn't over, we are giving it our very best shot. And that is why getting into debt deliberately is helping Singapore fight COVID-19 financially.